If you want your home cinema to feel like a real cinema, you need to hear Mag Theatron. With more than 20 years' experience in commercial theatres worldwide, Mag's award-winning speaker systems deliver the same cinematic impact, now purpose-built for residential use. Made in Ukraine and engineered in-house, up to 95% of every transducer is Mag's own design. From high SPL loudspeakers to infrasonic subwoofers and DSP-loaded amps, Mag Theatron is the real deal. Exclusively available in Australia through Integrate Unlimited. If you've ever wished for a design partner without the overhead, meet Colosseum. Launched in 2024, Colosseum is a white-label design and engineering service built specifically for integrators, whether you're new to the game or running million-dollar installs. They turn basic floor plans into detailed, high-impact cinema-ready documentation, brand agnostic, collaboration first, and led by industry veteran Paul McLean. I've seen the work myself. This is world-class support for serious cinema projects. Colosseum, your behind-the-scenes design team. Hello and welcome to the Master Integrator podcast, where today we'll explore the evolving intersection between design, technology, and the people who bring both to life. I'm your host, Paul Skelton. Before we begin, a quick thanks to our sponsors, Integrate Unlimited, the exclusive Australian distributor of Mag Theatron, and Colosseum, for making this episode possible. Today's guest is Susie Rumbold, interior designer, educator, and past president of the British Institute of Interior Design. She's worked on everything from heritage homes to high-end hotels, dementia care facilities, and student housing. And she brings a rare combination of design expertise and openness to technology. What makes Susie's perspective so valuable is this. She doesn't just accept smart home technology as a necessary evil. She sees it as part of the design palette. And that's the heart of today's conversation. If we want homes that truly serve the people who live in them, integrators and designers can't work in isolation. We need to talk, we need to listen, and we need to join the design conversation. So if you've ever struggled to collaborate across disciplines or want to build more respectful, productive partnerships, this is where it all starts. This is Master Integrator. Here's Susie. How did you actually get into interior design to start with, and tell us a little bit about your journey to get where you are today?
Okay, so very briefly, I'm Australian. I grew up in Melbourne. I came to the UK in the early 80s and was originally working in fashion retail, and then got made redundant in 1993 and set up my interior design practice, which started off being a very simple little business and then has kind of grown over the years to become a company where we're sort of international award-winning. We do multi-resi work. We do high-end private clients. We do dementia and care homes, we do student accommodation, we do hotels, we do all manner of different stuff. So we're a small practice, but we punch above our weight. I was president of the British Institute of Interior Design in 2016-17. I helped to write the professional service contracts with the Royal Institute of British Architects for interior designers in the UK. I wrote the handbook on professional practice for the industry. I do some lecturing and I co-host a podcast. But apart from that, I don't do much.
So a lot of free time is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, all the time. Yeah, twiddling my thumbs.
So there might be a few integrators listening to this who are just starting out and they might not even know the difference between an architect and an interior designer. So are you able to explain what that difference is?
Sure. So we like to explain it to our clients because you're right, there's a lot of confusion about that. And it's tricky because architect is a protected term, but interior design is not. But if you think about construction projects as a continuum, where you would start with the outside shell and core of the building. That's typically what's handled by the architect. And then you get the kind of the hard landscaping internally, which may or may not be done by the architect or may be done by an architectural interior designer or an interior designer. By hard landscaping, I mean the internal room layouts, the joinery, the lighting, the small power, the kitchen design, the bathrooms, all that kind of stuff can be done by an architect, but often is done by an interior designer. And then you have the kind of front end, which is all the pretty bits, the stuff that people normally associate with interior design, which is the furniture, the rugs, the colours, the wall coverings, the lamps, the art. And we refer to that as interior decoration. So I like to explain to people that if you can imagine taking a building, peeling off the roof, turning it upside down, giving it an almighty shake, whatever falls out is the interior decoration, and whatever stays stuck to the building is the interior design.
I think that will actually give people a lot of clarity about where that line is, because I think the term interior design, most people would either sit there and think, is that an architect or is it interior decoration? It's not a term that a lot of people outside of construction necessarily are familiar with.
And the other thing I think is worth I also explain to people that architects tend to look at buildings from the outside in. They're about how the building sits in the environment. They're all out to beautify the planet. Whereas we're the ones doing it from the inside out, actually asking our clients what they keep in their top drawers and how they fold their socks. So that's the difference. It's really, we're very human centric, and I think more so than perhaps architects are.
Yeah, and without wanting to start a war with architects, because obviously I talk to a lot of associations, what I have found is when I've dealt with interior designers or building designers in the past, they tend to have a little bit more lived experience and come from a different perspective when they are dealing with clients, which I know from our industry in particular, they're a lot more receptive to what we're trying to do from a technology standpoint. So you are a little bit of a rarity as well, in that you are an interior designer who is familiar with smart home technology, and that that is
Is
very
that
hard
a
to
rare?
find
Is that a rare thing in this day and age?
in
You shocked me.
Australia. It is. I
Really?
talk to. I mean, I talk to a lot of building designers here and interior designers, and that they look at me with just this kind of glazed look and have no idea what I'm talking about. Maybe it's a little bit more advanced in the UK.
Yeah, but I mean, I think if you go back 50 or 100 years, buildings were really pretty simple things. You had the structure, and then you had gas, electricity, and water coming in. Sometimes not even that. And you had wastewater going out, and the most sophisticated thing that ever happened in the built environment was the dimmer switch. And now we have security systems, CCTV, we have whizzing around buildings, we have building management systems, we have lighting control. It goes on and on and on and on. And all that stuff that's enhancing people's lives within the built environment and enabling people to do things within the built environment is all down to the installers. And for me, it's just, I mean, any decent sized project we take on would always have an element of technology in it.
So, what was the first project that you worked on with technology involved?
So the first one I did, so I set my business up 33 years ago, 32 years ago. The first project I worked on with home technology would have been in the early 90s. I had a client who had traveled extensively, was an oil trader actually, and he bought a house in Little Venice, which it's a very beautiful part of London. If people are familiar with it, it's gorgeous. And he bought this big old Georgian house, which needed everything doing to it. And because he'd stayed in so many international hotels, he was familiar with lighting control, and he'd seen these things that were made by a company called Lutron, and they were called graphic eyes. And so I had to be really quickly kind of find out how and what these were and how they worked, and how we could use them in his project, because he was really keen to incorporate that in, as well as things like speakers in the ceilings and a bunch of other things. I mean, I think that the technology we had for getting data around the building was a patch panel, where you had, it was like an old-fashioned telephone exchange thing where you could move things around by pushing in little cables. That was hilarious. But I mean, at the time, it was state of the art. But that was probably 1994, I think I was working on that. So it's a long time ago, actually.
So that's really at the beginning of the industry. I think the first control system only came out in about 89 or 90.
Yeah.
So yeah, that would have been very, very early days for the technology side of things. How did you go about working it into your designs? Because it would have been a very foreign concept at that point.
Yeah, yeah, it was. It was. I mean, I'm a bit of a geek, so I quite like that stuff. And in those days, most of the kind of home technology stuff was about enormous speakers. It was toys for boys, and the wives hated it. And it was all about, we're going to have this exquisite drawing room, and we're going to put these enormous 5 foot tall, 1.5 meter black speakers in the corners. And the wife's going, "No, you're not on my watch." But yeah, so it was fascinating to me to suddenly be able to work with something like lighting control, because with the Lutron system, it meant that was also very user friendly. it's nice because actually the client can also modify the lighting settings if they want to. It doesn't require separate programming. And so we were specifying these very attractive little button bands to go by the doors, but we were kind of hiding the actual graphic eyes down behind, at sort of lower level behind sofas and things, so that they were still accessible, but they weren't. I'm very anti-wall acne and ceiling acne. One of the troubles that we have with all this stuff, of course, there's kit associated with it. It's not invisible, and sometimes it can be very ugly indeed. So I think part of the designer's role is to actually make it fully functional, working with the installer and the specifier, but also to make sure that it's not impacting adversely on the actual interior that you're creating, particularly if you're doing it within historic buildings.
Well, that's an interesting point, the historic buildings, because unlike, well, the vast majority of Australia, we don't have necessarily many historic buildings like we would, or what like you would be working with in the UK. Obviously, there are some, but it's not as old of a country as it is over there. So I'm interested, when you are going about designing, say, whether it's a historic property or really any job, how much of a factor is technology? How much is, well, if we take lighting design, for example, I mean, how early do you factor that into your designs and how
Oh,
you design around it?
right from the very beginning. So the process for us would work. We would take typically the architect's drawings. We'll kind of sense check those, see if there's anything we can kind of tweak or improve, because we're the ones that have taken the really detailed client brief. We're the ones that really understand how the clients are going to use all those individual spaces, what's going to go on in those rooms, how the traffic is going to move from room to room, what time of the day they're going to be used. This is universal. These principles apply irrespective of whether it's a commercial project or a residential project. We would start off by plotting in furniture. Then the next thing that happens is, okay, we can see how the rooms are now going to function. How are we going to light them? So it's that early on in the process. It's so early. And then it begins to develop. And then, of course, you have to think about how you're going to control the lighting. Is it something that's very simple? Is it something that you're going to have to use lighting control? How sophisticated is the lighting control going to be? Is there a particular user interface that we like the look of, that we want to try and work with the style of building? So there are all these things that you have to take into account.
And when you're at that point, once you've done your designs, is it a case of you put that out to tender to multiple integrators, or do you have integrators that you have kind of built a relationship with over time?
Sometimes it will be the client that brings the integrator with them. They might know someone that may have worked in one of their previous homes. We have integrators that we like to work with that are quite design savvy and also quite good at listening to the clients, because it's not all about the tech. It's about making sure that the client's needs are actually being met. And sometimes integrators can get so carried away. They're so clever, and the technology is so amazing, and they can do all this stuff. A cautionary tale I tell about a job that I did for a lovely family, lovely big house, and the client wasn't, the lady of the house wasn't terribly interested in all this tech. The husband was getting all carried away with lighting control and all the other things we've just been talking about. And all this client wanted to do was to be able to come downstairs in the morning, and she liked to come downstairs, put the kettle on, and listen to the news while she made herself a cup of tea. And they said, "Oh, yes, that's fine. We can do that for you. You press this button on your phone and you go into this app and you press this button." So the first morning she tries it, she comes downstairs and she realizes that she's forgotten her phone. So she puts the kettle on, goes back upstairs, gets her phone, comes back downstairs, realizes she's forgotten her glasses, goes back upstairs, gets her glasses, by which point the kettle is boiled and actually she's lost the moment. So she solved this problem by going out and buying a Roberts radio and sticking it in the kitchen. And she hated it. She was so annoyed because she'd been so explicit that the only thing she wanted was this one. This was her one little routine in the morning that she wanted to have. All she needed was a button on the wall that she pressed that turned on Radio 4. That's really all that was required. And the specifiers just overcomplicated it to the 110th degree.
Is that the biggest mistake you see integrators make? Just they get excited and carried away?
They get so carried away and they think it's fabulous. And, to them, it's simplicity itself. But to the clients, it can be a disaster. And particularly if they're older, or they have, perhaps they might have older people that come and stay with them. Maybe you have an elderly parent that comes and wants to stay in a bedroom and can't work out how to turn the lights on. We've done hotels where we've gone round and round the houses with the owner of the hotel, how do we make this lighting control in this bedroom so simple that anybody that walks into that room will intuitively know how to switch the lights on?
So really, it's a case of they need to kind of take a step back
Take
from
a step back and
what you're doing.
listen to what the client's actually asking you for, and think about who's going to be using. Think about the stakeholders. We talk about core clients, but we also talk about stakeholders. And stakeholders for us are anybody else that's going to wander into that space and try and use it. So in a residential application, your stakeholders might be guests, visitors, elderly, parents, pets. Might be, there's all sorts of weird things goes on with pets. Setting off PIRs or motion detectors or lights or whatever by accident. It might be the violin teacher, it might be the yoga teacher, it could be anyone that comes into the space to use it. In a hotel situation, your stakeholders are obviously your guests, but they're the reception staff, the cleaners, the tech people, the luggage handlers, the catering staff, the waitresses. It just goes on and on and on. So your stakeholders. So I think integrators need to be considering not just the core client, who might be the one obviously who's paying the bills. They're very important, don't get me wrong, but there has to be a kind of broader perspective on the stakeholders, the other people that are going to be using space. And I think that's where interior designers and integrators can work so well together, because we've already done that groundwork. We've taken that detailed brief.
So what else are you seeing out there that you think is actually working against the integration market from a client's perspective?
Built-in obsolescence, things that work beautifully for a decade and then suddenly just fail. And you get someone in to look at it and they go, oh yeah, but this is really old. And I'm going, actually, it's not. It's 10 years old. The client paid $250,000 for that. You're telling me now that it needs to be ripped out and replaced. Other things we see are kit racks and stuff being stored in places that get too hot. That's something else you need to work on with the designer or the architect, is to make sure there's ventilation or even sometimes an air conditioning unit. Put a fan coil in it in the plant room. That kind of stuff. And it's basic, but that sort of thing will reduce the life of gear by 50% if it's constantly running on hot.
So I'm interested how the relationship between technology and your designs has changed over the past 30 something years, 31 years. Obviously, it was lighting control in that first job, but what are you actually seeing from a technology perspective that you're actually excited about and working into more of your projects?
I think the things that are exciting me are things like building management systems, automated events, things like rain sensors on windows. You have some wonderful intelligent thinking going into all sorts of automated events. There was a wonderful project actually from one of the senior entrants a couple of years ago, which was a house in Scotland for a couple who were both professors, itinerant professors who spent a lot of time lecturing in America and were always flying in and were always jet lagged. And they had the whole lighting control and the window shades and things set up to kind of mitigate jet lag, which was so clever. It was just fantastic. So stuff like that I love. I love the intelligent use of technology. Let's take this and run with it and make it really exciting and improve people's lives, which is what all designers are trying to do, if you're honest. I like the idea of some of these really clever products now that are coming out that are enabling people to keep an eye on elderly parents. One of the biggest trends we're seeing at the moment is the aging in place is just huge. Most people do not want to go into a care home. They want to stay where they're living. They love their home. They love their neighborhood. They know the guy in the corner shop. They know their next door neighbors, and they're just very happy. So they don't want to leave. And anything that we can do that allows them to stay in their home for another 5-10 years and be happy and safe there. And technology can play an enormous role in that. And that could be anything, again, from clever lighting to some of these light fittings now that have built-in motion detectors, so that if somebody falls, there's an alert goes off. There's all sorts of things that are being developed, I find that side of it really exciting.
Yeah, the statistics around people who move into assisted living facilities and their life expectancy, it's terrifying of how much it actually shortens
People's
their life
lives.
expectancy. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So obviously, as you've seen in the industry, technology does play a massive role in this space in aging in place. But again, it comes back to that whole idea of over engineering, because it is a case of it's a generation that hasn't grown up with technology and they have to become used to it. So from a design perspective, is there anything that you're doing to enable or make it easier for people to engage with technology when they might not be familiar with it?
I think it's listening to them and actually recommending things that will be a positive improvement in their lives. So normally when we set up a meeting, depending on who's been appointed first, there will at some point early on in the project be a meeting with the integrator and the client. We would always ask to have a seat at that table because, again, I think we can explain to the integrator what it is that the client's actually trying to say, because sometimes they won't be able to express their requirements with great clarity in relation to the technology. So we would always try and be at that meeting so that we can kind of nut out a brief. But we are a brief for the technologists. But we are, and actually we're not referring to them as sort of, they used to be sort of AV installers, and we now refer to them as home technologists or building technologists, because I think that's a much more apt description of what they do. We are definitely, though, seeing a move back to simpler things. So more things going on in the background that the client's not aware about, heating control and, control of their environment, their air quality, their temperature, their humidity, their solar gain through windows, all that stuff that's just going on, opening and shutting seamlessly in the background. But the bits that they do actually touch, much simpler, much, much simpler. We're moving away from having 15 different lighting settings in all rooms because actually it's been shown that most people just come in and turn the lights on. And the other thing, weirdly, we're seeing is there's a kind of atavistic joy that people are experiencing in turning on their own table lamps. People love to come into a room. You might turn on one button that puts on your overhead light or your wall lights, but there's a joy at the end of the day to going around and drawing the curtains and turning on the lamps. It's a very kind of comforting, lovely thing to do. It's like, and I think it goes back probably hundreds of years to thousands of years, millions of years even, when we were living in caves and lighting a fire and getting snuggled down for the night.
Connected Magazine is your go-to publication for the commercial and residential AV and smart home industry. Commercial audio is booming, and some residential integrators are jumping in, coining the term resi-mercial to get a piece of the action. In the latest edition, we explore the newest solutions in this space and how they're unlocking recurring revenue opportunities. Grab the latest edition of Connected Magazine or head to the website for all your AV news and product updates. Links in this episode's description. Ethical technology design is no longer optional in the connected home. On July 29, the CEDIA Ethical Technology Design Conference, a virtual Australian-led event, dives into the role of ethics in system design, from privacy and safety to accessibility and well-being. Discover how integrators can deliver smarter, more responsible outcomes for clients. Register today at cedia.org. So a few of the examples around, obviously, what you mentioned there with agent in place, but also the technologies that you said that were, exciting you. We're talking about rain sensors, scheduling. They would fall more into function than form. So let's talk a little bit about that whole idea of form versus function. I mean, how have you navigated that? Because obviously, end users want things that look nice and they're happy to be in their environment. But how have you navigated that from a design perspective to ensure that it also has the function that they want? Because sometimes that won't necessarily gel.
Function should always come first. It doesn't matter how gorgeous it looks if it doesn't work. And so we would look at all the bits of gear very early on. And this, again, is another reason that the integrator needs to be involved so early on in the project. We would look at all the kit that it is required. So the size of the racks, the underheating manifolds, the people tend to think that all this wonderful tech is tiny and invisible. And the user interface bits might be tiny and pretty much invisible, but there are going to be enormous bits of stuff that have to go in cupboards. Air conditioning where we have to conceal fan coil units. So we're, as kind of good interior designers, we're aware of all those bits of gear that we have to accommodate within our designs. And I think it's something that trips up younger and less experienced interior designers because they forget that not only do they have to accommodate all this stuff, but it has to be able to be maintained, and it has to be maintained at the correct temperature. So we would start off with all this. We know how much stuff has to be, and we will work with the integrator to make sure that and the architect possibly, to make sure that we have accommodated all the stuff that's needed. And that's the first thing, so that most things can be, accessed for maintenance, but are hidden. That's the first thing in terms of not messing up the way the thing looks. And then anything you can do to eliminate, I mentioned it earlier, both wall and ceiling acne is great. There's an Italian, I think it might be Belgian actually, company called Prado, who've just come out with some fantastic light fittings that also do smoke detection and ventilation. And they're just these wonderful little fittings that go in the ceiling. So you don't have to have a smoke detector otherwise you end up with smoke detectors, sprinklers, lights, speakers, motion sensors, all manner of stuff. And it just looks horrible.
That is one reason why I do like going to ISC in Barcelona, because you see a lot of switches that just never make it to Australia. But the form factor it's stunning what they're doing, especially outside
Yeah,
of the European countries. It's amazing what they've been
beautiful
able to
things.
develop.
Yeah, there's some gorgeous, 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 gorgeous. I mean, can you ever say that a socket is gorgeous? A switch is gorgeous? But they're gorgeous. They're so nice.
So let's talk a little bit about some of the well, let's be awkward. Let's talk about relationships. So,
Should we be having that call now? It's now the moment really.
what makes a good relationship between an integrator and a designer? What do you want to see out of an integrator that you're working with that makes it a happy relationship, that no one's standing on anyone's toes? What's going to frustrate you?
Don't listen. We were doing a big hotel project, 470 room hotel in the City of London a few years ago. And the integrator was quite frankly a nightmare. And I would turn up on site and suddenly things had appeared. And you'd have the conversation with them in the site meeting on the Tuesday morning about, this is going here and these are the drawings and blah, blah. And you'd turn up on site and there would suddenly be a television where there was a cupboard going, or it was just a nightmare. And it must have created so much work for him. And I'm sure the client was paying for all of it. So that's the other thing. So, you have to, you are part of the professional construction team. So you are part of that team that's architect, interior design, engineer, M&E, services engineer, and then the integrator is the next one on the list, lighting designer, whoever. So everybody on the team has to work together. We will always on our projects aim to have one set of fully coordinated project information. That means that everybody contributes their information onto a master set of drawings. That eliminates clashes. And you are having these conversations all the time with the integrator about, well, that needs to go there. I know you have a piece of kit that needs to go there. It can't be further away, distances. It can't be further away from the rack than X or whatever it happens to be. How are we going to make that work so that the function is not impeded and the thing still looks great and I can still meet those client requirements? So it's just talking. So it's people that don't listen is the problem. And we'll always bend over backwards to accommodate the requirements of the installer.
So I do find though that there's a lot of integrators that they're not really familiar with that part of the conversation. So they're technically minded people. They're very, very good at technology. They understand specs. They understand how that all works together. So how have you found, I guess, in general terms, that they've adapted to the idea of a design conversation? Are they open to it? Do they participate? Do they maybe not quite get it? Or is there anything that you wish as a whole that they would understand more?
I think the first time they work with a good interior designer, they often come to that first meeting bristling and prickly because they think that, we're going to somehow interfere with all the things that they want to do. And I think once they've worked with an interior designer who is tech savvy and they realize how we can improve their delivery and product, they're sold. And then from that point onwards, they will always work well with us. And I think that's one of the reasons why we've ended up with a small handful of preferred integrators that we like to work with, because we know they listen, we know we can work together, we know we understand each other, and we know that we're all working in the best interests of the client.
And so with the preferred integrators that you work with, are there similarities that you've noticed? Is there certain qualifications or experiences that they've had that you sit there and go, okay, they understand it because of that? Or is it just
No,
luck of the
no, I
draw?
don't think so. I think it's a mindset as much as anything. I mean, you're assuming any integrator, you're assuming has got the technical know-how. And particularly anyone who's a CDIA member is going to have the technical know-how. We would all prefer to work with on resi projects. We would prefer to work with CDIA and CDIA installers. but it's really a mindset. It's being open to listening and being open to find creative solutions.
And do you find that generally integrators have been open to learning about the design side of it, or the good ones do and some just
Yeah,
aren't interested?
some do and some do and some don't. There is I don't know. And I do wonder too whether a lot of interior designers are female and a lot of these very techy blokes are blokes, and perhaps they struggle with the dynamic of the relationship. She's hesitating to not use the word misogyny, but whatever. And installers have to realize that actually we know probably they know everything about their area, but we know a bit about their area and we know an awful lot about all the other bits of the building as well. So a good interior designer's knowledge of buildings is going to be just so encyclopedic. They mustn't assume that we don't know what we're talking about, which can be a problem. They can be quite patronizing when you start working with them.
I was about to make a similar comment, whether you found that they are patronizing or condescending, because do they sum up what you do as essentially there's a throw pillow over there, or
Yeah, exactly.
maybe,
There,
yeah.
we'll just we'll put a throw on the end of that sofa and we'll hang a picture and that'll be a little lamp. It'll be nice and flowers. Be good. Yeah, it'll be nice
So would you call that a bit of a red flag then?
for installers or for designers.
Or as a designer working with an integrator, if someone does come with that mentality, is that a red flag to you? Someone that
That is a red flag.
it's not
That
going
is
to
a red
end
flag.
well.
Right. No, and it can be difficult because of course if it's an installer that's been brought on board by the client, you have to work with them. You're going to have to make that relationship work. It can be difficult, but hopefully we get there.
So what are some of the other red flags that you've experienced with integrators that you've kind of immediately gone, okay, we're going to have a problem, or this is not going to work well?
I think, to be honest, I think that's the main one. That really is. It's that and the inability to listen and perhaps not really taking on board what the client is actually asking for. Those would be the main ones for me.
So as a designer, is there anything that you would like to learn about from the integration world that you think would be helpful moving forward?
Yes, I think there is definitely an education piece. Lots of integrators will provide CPDs, continuing professional development sessions for designers, and it could be a great way for integrators to actually contact designers. I don't know what the professional bodies for interior design are in Australia. That's a shameful thing to admit to. I should know, but there must be ways that integrators can actually contact interior designers and get their message out there about what they can contribute. Because perhaps in Australia, if the market is not as evolved as it is here, it might also be the case that interior designers don't know what is on offer. So if there are integrators that have got great showrooms or facilities where they could get a group of designers in over sort of learn and lunch sort of a thing where you buy them a sandwich and they come and spend an hour and you can show them all the toys so that they're enthusiastic about selling those to their clients. I mean, we can do an enormously good sales job for you if we understand what it is that we can make recommendations to the client about the systems and the technology that they should be considering for their homes. So I think there's a lot could come from the integrators as well. In the UK, they're very proactive on this. Lots and lots and lots of integrators have got CPDs that they will offer to groups of interior designers, and they will join organisations as industry partners, such as the British Institute of Interior Design. And that, of course, then gives them access to lots of networking events and things where they can go and meet designers and chat to them. So, it's a symbiotic relationship.
So in Australia, we have the Building Designers Association, and I've been having a few conversations with them about rolling out CPD that we have created for architects to the building designers and the interior designers as well. And they've been very receptive to that because I find that there's a definite focus on getting the CPD in front of architects, and it's almost as if the interior designers and the building designers get forgotten about from that kind of perspective.
No, I think that's definitely where the focus should be, because actually the architects, if harking back to the beginning of the conversation, if the architects are responsible for shell and core, and it's the interior designer who is the one who's actually looking at how those rooms are going to be used on a really minute forensic basis, then those are the people that the integrator should be targeting, so that the understanding of what's available, the different types of control systems for all manner of different things. I always think that you guys are pretty advanced actually with your tech. because it is, the climate is harsh and you need things like automated window treatments and things like that can make people's lives much better, and air conditioning that comes on that doesn't interfere with heating and all that sort of stuff. So I think you are quite tech savvy, but perhaps the interior designers don't know don't have access to the full range of possibilities. Does that make sense?
It does, and I think that's absolutely right. And I mean, and you would have seen it too in some of the seedier awards, because you have been a judge from the design and build categories in the past. I find it too when I see the work that's coming out of Australia, New Zealand, and then compare that to Europe and over in America. And for a very small market, we definitely do bat above our weight when it comes to that. That some of the jobs that we're putting out there are,
Oh, they're magnificent.
world
Yeah,
class.
yeah, totally.
Yeah, so it really is just a way of making sure that those are getting in front of the right audience, because we have had a very long history of talking to ourselves.
No,
And definitely,
so in Australia, is it that the technology market is perceived as being something that's just super high end and that it's not for everybody?
it was that for a very long time. So when I joined the industry 20 years ago, or next year will be 20 years, it was rich and famous people. That was it. It was ultra wealthy clients, which made it very limited, because Australia, we don't have the generational wealth that they do in Europe and parts of the US. It's just non-existent. We have definitely noticed a shift. There's an expectation around younger people buying houses for the first time. They believe technology should be included. For me personally, the biggest opportunity for our market is more within the disability sector, because it is making it no longer a luxury item. It's moving it to a necessity, and we are doing a lot of work there as well, in dealing with that space. So there is a shift. I do find that the integrators who have been around for a long time are still working in that high end market. It's the new guys coming in, and typically they would be from an electrical background or a cabling background that are open to the idea of the entry level, the mass market. So there is there's a divide in the industry from that perspective.
Yeah, and I suppose it's been driven to, I imagine, by things like, well, we have, you can buy on Amazon, you can buy, doorbells with cameras and stuff in them. And so the expectation now is that people do have little bits of, and things like, home smart speakers. That all has had a huge impact on people's. So there's a greater awareness within the public at large of what's possible. And it's just the integrators then need to be able to go in and kind of say, okay, well, I can see you've got this and this, but if we did X, Y, and Z, it could be so much more. And maybe it's just a sort of softly catchy monkey. The problem, of course, is that going to be economically viable by the time you've, for fairly low value projects, are you going to be able to involve an installer?
Well, I think it depends where you sit in the market, and I think there's still a lot of hesitation around things like Alexa, and Google Home Assistant, because people think they're just going to undercut the market. I disagree with that. I think the best thing ever was Amazon doing a massive advertising campaign saying, "Alexa, turn off my lights," and people going out and buying all of these Echoes and trying it. It doesn't do that. It doesn't do that without the integration arm. So they should be leveraging that. But the smartest thing that I heard around that is there's an integrator in the US. He actually went and bought, I think it was about 15 or 20 Echo devices, and then dropped them off at the doorsteps of potential clients he hadn't dealt with before, with a business card that said, "If you want to learn how to integrate this into your house, give me a call. Otherwise, enjoy a free Echo."
And how many calls back did he get?
I think of the 20 he put out there, I'll say he only got 2, but that's all he needed. If
Yeah,
every device was, in the US, I think they were about $40 at that point, but even one job would more than pay for a
yeah,
couple
yeah,
hundred bucks.
yeah, amazing.
Yeah, so there's definitely a few operators who understand that it's well, I call it a gateway drug. It's a way in and way to upsell what they're doing. I definitely think that's going to be a big driving force moving forward. There'll still be the high end. There'll always be the
Yeah.
high end.
But also, you don't have to do the entire building. Not everything in the building has to be smart. We're finding that with some of the smaller projects we do, or maybe some retrofit projects where we're going in and we're saying, okay, you don't really need the lighting control upstairs in the children's bedrooms. So you don't need it in the hallway and the stairs because you're just going to put the lights on and go upstairs and turn it off again. But maybe we just do it in the drawing room. Maybe it's the kitchen. One area where it works beautifully, of course, is big open plan kitchen family living spaces, kitchen family dining living areas, where you've got a lot of zoning going on, and you can use the technology to do all sorts of things, and kind of keep the areas separate, same but different, if that makes sense. So I think, people can go in and put a toe in the water, and I think that again would be great if the integrators were talking to the interior designers, because the interior designers can have those conversations.
With that in mind, if there is an integrator listening to this who's never dealt with an interior designer before, what would you say to them of how they should go about approaching that? I mean, should they be afraid? And what should they prepare in advance?
No. They shouldn't be afraid. They should be excited and, up for it. And they don't need to prepare anything in advance. They just need to have that conversation about, if they're approached by an interior designer, or if they approach an interior designer to see whether any projects, perhaps a demo, perhaps, talking to the interior designer about what different types of technology he or she is already familiar with. But yeah, they just need to be open to having the conversation. So, and if they're really, just a sort of someone living in a bat cave, then perhaps they need to employ someone that can be the face of the business to go out and do the schmoozing. I don't know. Somebody has to be able to talk. That's the thing.
To wrap it all up, in the perfect world, in an ideal world, describe the perfect relationship between an interior designer and an integrator. What does that look like?
The perfect relationship between an interior designer, and I'm thinking of one actually as I'm saying this, is somebody who is receptive to ideas, will work with you to solve problems creatively, will listen, and we listen. I mean, it's a two-way street. But we'll listen to concerns. We'll listen to concerns of the client. We'll be rigorous about the installation and making sure that it's not glitchy, because nothing knocks holes in a client's confidence faster than spending a lot of money in technology that then does not work.
And at no point do they need to look at fabric swatches or...
Oh, hell no. No. Oh, with the one exception that if we're doing cinema design, obviously, if we're going to conceal speakers behind fabric, you need to be able to, sound needs to be able to pass through. So the way to test that, should any of the integrators ever need to know this, if you pick up the piece of fabric and hold it over your mouth, if you can, and breathe in and out, if you can breathe through it, you can hear through it. So if you can't breathe through it, it's going to be too thick to put in front of a speaker. So if someone's doing a home cinema design, and they want to, pad out the walls with beautiful fabric, the fabric has to be thin enough for the sound to pass through if you're going to conceal speakers behind it. So that would probably be the only time I can imagine that the integrator would have to opine on the fabric, but then it would only be from a technical standpoint, not what it actually looks like.
That was Susie Rumbold. And if there's one takeaway from that conversation, it's this. Great design isn't just about aesthetics, and great technology isn't just about function. The best results come when both work in harmony. For integrators, that means listening. For designers, it means being open. And for everyone, it means treating collaboration not as a hurdle, but as a creative opportunity. If you found today's episode valuable, please share it with a colleague, a client, or someone you'd like to start a better design conversation with. Thanks for listening to Master Integrator. I'm Paul Skelton. I'll see you next time.